5, which is from plant physiology. It's transpiration. Now we all know the basic definition of transpiration, that is the loss of water in the form of water vapor through the aerial parts of the plant. Now we will discuss some details about this topic in this chapter. Okay. So at first let us demonstrate how transpiration occurs, or whether transpiration actually occurs in the plants or not. So we have taken a potted plant and then covered it with a plastic bag and then put it out in the sunlight. After a few hours, we will notice that few droplets have formed inside the plastic bag. Now why? Obviously because of the transpiration. Due to transpiration, the water escapes the plant, and due to the covering of the plastic bag, it gets condensed and deposited on the surface of the plastic bag. Obviously, a simple plastic bag without any plant in it, if kept outside the sunlight, will not form any droplet. That means this is only because of transpiration. Now, let us take another experiment where we have taken 3 bell jars and 3 setups. Okay. In the first setup, we have placed a potted plant. In the second setup, we have placed the second potted plant along with a cobalt chloride paper, a dry cobalt chloride paper, and in the third jar or the third setup, we have kept only a dry cobalt chloride paper. Okay. Now, a dry cobalt chloride paper is blue in color. Okay. Now after few hours of keeping 3 of them in the sunlight, what happens that in the first setup, water droplets are deposited inside the surface of the bell jar. Obviously because of the condensed water from the transpiration. The second setup, the water droplets are deposited, and also the cobalt chloride paper turns pink because in the presence of moisture, the blue cobalt chloride paper turns pink, which again concludes that transpiration occurs in plants. In the third bell jar, what happens when there is no plant and only the cobalt chloride paper? It remains blue because there is no moisture. Thus, from these experiments, we can clearly tell, or it is clearly proved, that transpiration does occur in plants. Now, how do we measure this transpiration rate? There are few different ways, like the weighing method, which is normally weighing in 2 ways. That is, the first way would be, we will keep a potted plant covered from top to bottom over a weighing machine, and before and after the transpiration. From that we will easily get the measurement. Okay. Now another way is that we can keep the plant inside a test tube and fill it with water, and on top of it with some oil to prevent the loss of water through evaporation. Okay. Now after few hours, when we will see the test tube, we will see that the water level is decreased. It means the water is taken up by the plants and that it is transpired by the plant. Okay. And the weighing part, if we measure the first test tube before the transpiration occurs and after the transpiration occurs, and we get a difference, then we easily get the measurement of the transpired water. Okay. Now let us move on to another important measurement object, that is photometer. Now photometer is nothing but a device which is used to measure the rate of intake of water by plants. Now photometer is of 3 types. Gannon's photometer. Gannon's photometer tells us the rate of water in the tank. Darwin's photometer tells us about the suction force created by the transpiration pool, and Garrow's photometer mentions the unequal transpiration rate from two surfaces of a dorsiventral leaves. Now in this chapter we will only discuss about the Gannon's photometer. Okay, the other two, that is the Darwin's photometer and the Gallow's photometer, वो हायर क्लास के लिए रख देते हैं. ठीक है. Now how does the Gannon's photometer operate? We have taken a apparatus here and filled it with water and kept a sapling inside this opening. Water is also stored here as a reservoir with a valve which can be opened or closed at any time. Now what happens is that to measure the water intake, this capillary is raised above the water a bit so that a air bubble can be introduced inside the capillary tube. Now that air bubble moves through the capillary tube due to the suction force created by the transpiration pull up here. So as long as the water bubble moves and the scale is fitted properly, you can easily measure the water intake by the plant. The bubble can also be moved back inside this beaker again by forcing water through it when we open the reservoir. Okay. Now we have to take some precautions before building the Gannon's photometer properly. Okay. We need to make sure that the apparatus is made airtight, otherwise it won't give a proper result. Second, we have to cut this twig properly, slantingly, otherwise the air bubble might enter the twig and thus it will stop the water uptake by the xylem. Next, there comes some limitations to this photometer. Few of them being that introducing the air bubble in this capillary tube is not very easy. Second, the twig may die after few times. Third, which is the most important thing, is that any pressure changes outside the setup or outside this beaker will affect the water intake by this twig, and also it won't show a proper measurement. Got it? Good. Now there are three kinds of transpiration. Those are the stomatal transpiration, the cuticular transpiration and the lenticular transpiration. Now in the cuticular transpiration, the transpiration directly occurs through the leaf and the stem surface. That is, the water vapor is directly evaporated from the leaf surface. Now lenticular surfaces, what is lenticular transpiration? Now lenticular transpiration occurs through lenticels. Lenticels क्या होता है? Lenticels is the opening on the bark of old trees or on some fruits through which this lenticular transpiration occurs or the water evaporates. Now ये ज़रूर दिमाग में रखना कि the lenticels never close. Like the stomatal cells close sometimes, but the lenticels always remains open. Okay, got it? तो हम लोग ऑलरेडी डिस्कस कर चुके हैं lenticular transpiration और cuticular transpiration. Those are not very complicated although. But here the stomatal transpiration is a bit more complex than those two, although not very difficult to understand. So let us understand the mechanism of stomatal transpiration. Now let us first get familiar with the structure of stoma. Although you know this, but let us revisit this. Okay. Now the epidermal cell extensions are the stomata. It has two guard cells from where the water vapor for transpiration actually escapes. Now during the day, these two guard cells are open for CO2 intake. Okay. There are about 1,000 to 10,000 stomatas per centimeter square of a leaf. Okay. Now, happens of the root is that the water from the roots are transported to the leaves, obviously through the cell wall, mostly by imbibition. Okay, and sometimes it's also osmosis. Okay, now what happens, that what is the mechanism is that the water that is collected from the roots and the xylem enters this spongy mesophyll cells inside the leaf. Okay, now from here the water forms thin film and enters these intercellular spaces, as you can see here. Now these intercellular spaces are actually nothing but a empty space where it can store the water in the form of water vapor. Now from here, that is from this intercellular spaces, the water rushes inside the substomatal space. What is substomatal space? Now substomatal space is nothing but the area, the empty space before the opening of the stoma. Okay. Now from here, when the water vapor has completely filled the intercellular space or the substomatal space here and has formed a high concentration than that of the low concentration outside the stoma, the water vapor escapes from here through the stoma. Got it? So here also we can find the concept of the movement of water vapor or molecules from the region of higher concentration to lower concentration, as when the intercellular spaces are filled with water vapor and it cannot hold any more water vapor, that is, it has become highly concentrated, it moves through the mesophyll cells to the substomatal space, where it again fills that space, makes it a high concentration and leaves through the stoma. Got it? It's very easy. कुछ भी complicated नहीं है इसमें, ठीक है? So to conclude this, the water vapor first enters the roots, then it travels through the xylem up to the leaves. Okay? Then it moves inside the spongy mesophyll cells of the leaves. Then through imbibition and diffusion, the water vapor diffuses inside this intercellular spaces, and when it has attained a region of high concentration, it moves to the substomatal space before the stoma, and then again when the high concentration situation is received, that is the water vapor, goes out through the stomata or the stomatal opening, that is by completing the transpiration. Okay. Now these transpiration, when the water is evaporated outside, in turn creates a low concentration situation inside this intercellular spaces, as a result of which more water is drawn up by the leaves, or we can say this is the transpiration pull. Now, transpiration pull can pull up waters up to a height of tall trees like 50 meters tall. I hope you have clearly understood the concept. In dicot leaves, more transpiration occurs from the lower surface of the leaves. Now, how? It's quite evident that obviously there are the occurrence of more stomata on the lower surface of the leaf than that of the upper surface of the leaf. Now these type of leaves are known as dorsiventral leaves. Dorsi from the name dorsal, and that is the lower part, and ventral from the name ventral, obviously that is the upper part of it. Now let us discuss this phenomena with the experiment right here. Now what we have done here is that we have taken two leaves and attached dry cobalt chloride paper on alternative surfaces of the leaves. First one on the upper surface, that is the ventral part, and the second cobalt chloride paper on another leaf facing the dorsal side, that is the lower part. Okay. Now we all know that dry cobalt chloride paper is a indicator for moisture. That is, if a dry cobalt chloride paper comes in contact with moisture, it turns pink. Now after leaving this setup for a few hours, what we will notice is that the blue cobalt chloride paper which was attached on the upper part or the ventral surface of the leaf turns pink very slowly, or it remains blue, while in the cobalt chloride paper which was attached to the dorsal side turns pink easily, or that is faster than that of the attached to the ventral part. Now this clearly proves that more moisture has been released by the lower surface of the leaf, thus proving the concept of transpiration from the dorsiventral leaves. Okay, that is, more stomata is present on the lower surface of a dipod leaf than that of the upper surface of that dipod leaf. क्लियरली समझ गए होंगे आप सब लोग. Now let us come to the stomatal regulation. Now what happens is that stomatal regulation is completely related with the turgidity of the guard cells. Okay. Now what happens is that when the guard cells has enough supply of cell sap, or that is, it is turgid, it remains open, right? And when there is less supply of water, that is, the guard cells become flaccid, it closes, and hence the transpiration also closes. Okay. Now we all know that during the day the stomatal openings are open due to the intake of CO2 by diffusion. So obviously more transpiration takes place during the day, while in the night time, when the guard cell closes, when there is no need of CO2 anymore, the transpiration reduces, or rather the transpiration completely stops. Okay. Now in few plants we have seen, like plants like balsam, what happens to those leaves is that these leaves wilt during the midday, or that is because the flaccid conditions of the guard cells. Now why does it become flaccid? It becomes flaccid because the rate of transpiration is extremely high during the midday for plants like balsam. Due to that, excess water is lost through transpiration. Okay, and as a result, the guard cells become flaccid, due to which it closes the stomatal opening, thus closing the transpiration. Now what happens in the afternoon is that because of the closure of the guard cells and the stopping of the transpiration, the water by these guard cells are regained. Okay, and after regaining that water and the condition of turgidity, the guard cells reopens and the transpiration continues to happen. Okay, very good. Now let us discuss about some factors affecting this transpiration. Now we have already learned that due to the turgid conditions, the guard cells opens, transpiration starts. Due to the flaccid condition, the guard cell closes and the transpiration stops. Now, what regulates those factors? There are two types, those are external and the internal factors. Now let us first go through the external factors. The first one being the sunlight. Now first of all, we all know that during the day conditions, the guard cells are open for CO2 intake. Hence, the transpiration rate is higher. Second, ड्यू टू द सनलाइट बाहर का टेम्परेचर तो ज़्यादा होता है ना, तो बाहर का टेम्परेचर ज़्यादा होने की वजह से ट्रांसपिरेशन का रेट भी बढ़ जाता है. एंड ड्यूरिंग द इवनिंग व्हेन द हीट हैज़ रिड्यूस्ड द ट्रांसपिरेशन रेट ऑल्सो reduces. Okay, so we can also say that transpiration rate, where should I write? Okay, so the transpiration rate that is denoted by T here is directly proportional to the sunlight. Okay, that is, if there is more sunlight, the transpiration rate is also more. Now let us move on to the second factor, which is temperature, which are obviously interrelated with the presence of sun. Now if the temperature is high, the transpiration rate will also be more, because if the temperature is high, the outside atmospheric condition is of low concentration. As a result, the water vapors from the leaves escapes out through the stomata, where there was high concentration, flushes out. Thus, the transpiration occurs. Okay, so more temperature means more transpiration. Next comes the wind. Now, if there are high speed winds or there is more wind, the transpiration rate will also be high. Now why? It's simple, because if there is more wind blowing, then the already moisturized air that is surrounding the leaf is being removed faster. Hence, to compensate that, more transpiration occurs. So more wind equals to more transpiration rate. Next comes the humidity. Now what happens is that if there is much humid conditions in the atmosphere, the transpiration rate decreases. Why? Simple, because अगर एयर में ऑलरेडी वाटर वेपर प्रेजेंट होगा तो ट्रांसपिरेशन की क्या ज़रूरत है? कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. तो फिर क्या होता है, उसकी वजह से गार्ड सेल्स बंद हो जाता है, उसकी वजह से ट्रांसपिरेशन भी बंद हो जाता है. तो more humid air means less transpiration, or we can say that transpiration is indirectly proportional to humidity. Got it? Next comes the CO. Now an interesting thing happens here is that we all know that for CO2 diffusion, the guard cells are open during the day. So तुम सब बोलोगे कि अगर CO2 ज़्यादा है तो ट्रांसपिरेशन भी ज़्यादा होगा, राइट? मतलब सिंपल लॉजिक तो यही बोलता है. लेकिन यहाँ पे क्या होता है कि जब the CO2 rate exceeds 0.03% in the atmosphere, the stomatal cells closes. Now why? It is because this percentage of CO2 is extremely high, and that is not good for the plants. That is why the stomatal pore closes and the transpiration also stops. Next, we are moving on to the atmospheric pressure. Now, if there is high pressure outside the leaves, then there obviously the transpiration will be less. Because why transpiration occurs? The question is that transpiration occurs because there is low pressure outside the leaf and high pressure inside of the leaves. But if the atmospheric pressure increases, then there is no need of more pressure, right? That is why the transpiration stops or reduces. Got it? Now these are the few external factors that affects the rate of transpiration. Now let us move on to the internal factors. Okay, now what happens is that there is only one important factor, which is the water content of the leaves. Now if there is more water content in the leaves, that is, if the guard cells are turgid, they are open, hence more transpiration. And if the water content is less, the guard cells become flaccid, and hence the transpiration reduces or completely stops. But this is the simple mechanism of the closing and the opening of the guard cells. Very good. Now let us move on to the adaptations that are used to reduce the transpiration. Now why do we even need to reduce transpiration? Now for that we need to know a thing, is that transpiration is known as the necessary evil. Now transpiration, obviously it's necessary for the plants to regulate the water molecules, but it is also called evil, or it is harmful for the plants, because if there is excess transpiration, that is, there will be more loss of water, and excess loss of water may lead to the death of the plant. So that is why sometimes the transpiration must be limited. Now how can it be limited? Those can be limited by the adaptations that are made by the plants. What are those adaptations? Those are, first being the sunken stomata. Now sunken stomata means there are closed stomata, or those are covered with hairs. Now due to this sunken stomata, the transpiration rate can be reduced. Second comes the fewer stomata. Obviously, if there are few stomata, then there will be less transpiration or less loss of water. Next comes narrow leaves. Now narrow leaves means less surface area, and less surface area means less evaporation or less transpiration. Next comes the reduced exposed stomata. That is, most of those stomata in those type of plants are not exposed to the sunlight, or that is covered, or those have curled up or rolled up, in order to reduce the rate of transpiration. Okay. Next comes the loss of the leaves. Now what happens is that we have all seen cactuses. Okay, now cactuses have thorns. Now वो जो cactus का जो कांटा होता है ना, तो वो कांटा क्या होता है? Those are actually the modified leaves, right? Now those leaves are modified in the form of spine in order to reduce transpiration or stop transpiration. Okay, like in desert areas, we all know there is almost no rain and no water bodies around the area where the cactuses grow. Now on top of that, if transpiration occurs, then the plant will die, right? So to stop that transpiration, the leaves are modified into spines so that there are no stomatal opening for transpiration. Got it? Okay. Now next comes the last but not the least are the cuticles. Sometimes the leaves of the few plants like banyan tree are covered with very thick cuticle. Okay. Now those very thick cuticle acts as a cover or a jacket, right? And that stops from transpirating at a higher rate. I hope you have clearly understood the concept. Okay. The significance of transpiration. Now we have already learned about the concept of the necessary evil. Now how the transpiration is necessary. First being the cooling effect. Now we all know that evaporation equals to reducing temperature, right? Now evaporation always leads to cooling, which is very important for the plants, right? Otherwise, in very high temperature, the enzymes or the other cell organelles in the plants may die. That is why transpiration is really necessary for the leaves for the cooling of them. Okay. Next is the suction pressure which we have already discussed in the previous chapter, that was the absorption by root. That more transpiration means more need of water in the upper parts of the plants, which means more suction force, or that is more water will be pulled upwards by the plant by the transpiration pull in order to compensate the vacuum or in order to equalize the low concentration in the upper regions of the plant. Okay. Now next comes the distribution of water and minerals. Now in the stomatal mechanism, we have already discussed that how the water from the mesophyll cells goes towards the substomatal space and then ultimately transpired out. Due to that, we have already seen that the water travels in the form of water vapor, right? In this way, the minerals and water is also distributed throughout the leaves. And obviously, due to the suction force, the water is evenly distributed throughout the upper surface of the plant. Got it? Right. Now, we have all heard that we need to plant more trees for more better nature or better climate, right? Now, how? Now we know the answer. That is because of the transpiration. Because transpiration hugely affects the climate. How? That is when the water escapes the plants through transpiration, the air conditions in that region become more humid, right? And when the air becomes excessively humid, it pours down as rain. Hence, transpiration is directly connected with the occurrence of rain or precipitation. Got it? Right. Next, let us discuss about the direct loss of water by the plants other than transpiration. Okay. Now we have already discussed about guttation in the previous chapter, but let us discuss about this concept from the perspective of transpiration. Okay. Now when there is no transpiration or that the transpiration is stopped due to few external factors like more humid conditions in the atmosphere, right? Due to more humid conditions in the atmosphere, the transpiration stops. Due to that, the water inside the plant cannot escape through the stomatal pores. Then what happens? Obviously, the plant doesn't explode, right? There comes guttation. Okay? When transpiration cannot remove the excess water in the plants, guttation, that is the oozing out of water droplets from the edges of the leaf veins occurs. That is, the excess water escapes the leaves through the hydropods in the form of guttation. Okay. Next comes the bleeding. What happens in bleeding? Bleeding is simple. When there is excess turgidity or when the excess water is present in the plant, the water oozes out through the cut surfaces of the leaves or the roots. It's very simple, nothing complicated. Now, before ending this chapter, let us go through some differences between transpiration and guttation. The first point being, water is always forced out of the plant through transpiration by water vapor only and not in any other form. While in guttation, the water is lost in the form of water droplets. Next, transpiration occurs during dry conditions, or that if more the dry air, more the transpiration occurs. Whereas guttation occurs during humid conditions when transpiration stops and guttation is the only way out for the excess water from the plants. Third, or last but not the least, is that transpiration occurs through opening called stomata, lenticels and cuticles, while guttation occurs through openings at the end of the leaf veins called hydathodes. Okay. Now with this we completely end this chapter. I hope you have clearly understood all the concepts in transpiration. कुछ भी बहुत difficult नहीं है कि तुम समझ ना सको. फिर भी go through the video and the notes that I attached with it. Okay, and you will be able to answer all the questions of the chapter. Got it? Thank you.